The wine glass was full when she stood up. 400 of the most powerful people in America stopped talking at the same time. She crossed the ballroom in a crimson dress, slow, certain. The way you walk when you believe the room belongs to you. The man at table 12 didn't move, didn't flinch. He just watched her come with the stillness of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment far longer than she could possibly know. "Did you really think," she said, "that you belonged here?" Then she raised the glass. What Eleanor Hartwell didn't know, what nobody in that ballroom knew, was that the man about to be drenched in Cabernet held her family's entire empire in his hands. 75 years, 3 generations, $1.2 billion. And he had come here tonight to answer a single question. She was about to answer it for him, the glass tilted. She wore Valentino to her phone. She just didn't know it yet. The dress was crimson, floor length, the kind of red that announces itself before the woman wearing it crosses the threshold. Eleanor Hartwell had chosen it 3 days ago, deliberately. The way she chose everything, with the absolute certainty that her taste was correct and everyone else's job was simply to confirm it. She stood in front of the mirror in their Palo Alto bedroom and saw exactly what she wanted to see. A woman who belonged, a woman who had always belonged, which was the problem with Eleanor, with everything that was about to happen. Because real belonging is not something you declare from a mirror at 7 in the evening. It is something other people decide, quietly, without asking your opinion. And Eleanor Hartwell, at 58 years old, had never once considered that the other people might be arriving at a different conclusion than the one she has assumed. The house was large and well-managed and always slightly too quiet. Not the quiet of peace. The quiet of a place where every surface had been arranged by someone other than the people who lived there, where Rosa came on Tuesdays and Thursdays and kept the kitchen immaculate and the garden alive and said very little because very little was invited. Eleanor moved through it with the ease of ownership. Down the hall, down the stairs, heels on marble, click, click, click. Douglas was in the kitchen. She heard him before she saw him, not moving around, just standing. The refrigerator was open, and he was looking into it the way people sometimes look into refrigerators when they are not actually thinking about food. He was 62 years old, CEO of Hartwell Defense Group. His name was on the building. His wife's grandfather had started with a single ammunition contract in 1948. 3 generations, 75 years. His face was in the annual report, and his signature was on every major contract the company had ever held. None of that was helping him right now. He was thinking about numbers. He was always thinking about numbers these days, the way you always think about the thing you cannot fix. 8 months of wrong numbers, 3 major Pentagon contracts dissolved, not lost in competition, dissolved quietly with the specific bureaucratic politeness that is somehow worse than a direct rejection. The Department of Defense was moving toward newer contractors, companies that understood autonomous systems, cyber defense architecture, the future of warfare. Hartwell for Defense was still manufacturing what it had always manufactured, the way it had always manufactured it. And the military had moved on. The spreadsheets on his laptop upstairs showed a timeline. 60 days. That was the number underneath all the other numbers. 60 days before the bank's clause activated. Before asset recovery conversations began. Before 3 generations of Hartwell legacy became a restructuring case study in the financial press. Unless tonight went differently. The Tech Innovation Charity Gala at the Fairmont Hotel San Francisco was Silicon Valley's most exclusive annual event. $1,000 a plate. Invitation only. The kind of room where decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars moved between the salad course and the entree. And somewhere in that room tonight was the final decision maker for a UAV contract worth $1. $2 billion. The contract would save everything. Douglas had prepared, had rehearsed talking points, had practiced the handshake. He had not prepared for what Eleanor was about to do. He heard her heels before he saw her. Click, click, click. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, and he looked up, and he had to admit, even now, even with everything pressing down on his chest, she was striking. Red dress, the dark hair, the posture of someone who had been told since childhood that rooms exist to receive her. "You look worried," she said, more observation than concern. "Sue, the way you know to scuff on a shoe." "I am worried," he said. "Don't be." She opened the refrigerator, considered it, closed it again. "Tonight is about presence. We walk in, we remind people who the Hartwells are. The rest follows." Douglas looked at the counter where his phone sat face down on top of his printed spreadsheets. Eleanor. He chose his words carefully, as he always did, as he had learned to over 31 years. "I need tonight to go smoothly. I need you to be. I need us to focus on the contract, on nothing else." I always make folks, she said. She was already walking toward the garage. He stood in the kitchen after she left and did not move for a moment, just stood there, in the quiet of the large house, listening to the specific silence that follows Eleanor's exit from a room. Something that is not quite relief and not quite dread, but contains elements of both. He picked up his phone. He followed her. The bay was dark. They had been driving for 11 minutes without speaking. Not uncomfortably, or rather, not in a way that either of them acknowledged as uncomfortable, because this was how they sometimes traveled together. Eleanor, with window slightly down despite the November chill, watching the lights of the water below the bridge approach and pass. Douglas, with both hands on the wheel at exactly 10 and 2. He said it somewhere between the bridge and the city, all of it. Not the version he had been giving the board for 3 months. Not the navigating headwinds version or the strategic repositioning version, the real version. The one with 6 days in it. The one where the banks had a clause and the clause was real, and the timeline was not a projection anymore, but a countdown. He watched her face in his peripheral vision while he talked, her profile against the dark glass, the jaw. The particular erectness of her spine that never varied, that seemed engineered into her at some structural level, as though the architecture of her body had been designed as around a premise of perpetual readiness. She did not speak while he talked. She listened, which was unusual enough that he noticed it. When he finished, the car was quiet except for the road. After a while, she said, "Then we need that contract." "Yes," Douglas said. "We need that contract." So we go. We make the right impression. We remind them who we are. He gripped the steering wheel. This was the thing he had never been able to explain to anyone who had not lived inside this marriage. The mechanism of Eleanor under pressure. Most people, when frightened, got smaller, quieter. More careful, they pulled in their edges. They recalibrated. Eleanor expanded. When Eleanor was afraid, something activated in her that did not have an off switch. Some ancestral reflex that interpreted danger as a command to become more herself, more certain, more present, more armored, as though the threat required not retreat but an even more complete declaration of who she was. He had watched it for 31 years. He had married it in some ways because it looked like strength from the side, and it was strength of a particular and specific kind, the kind that gets things done in certain rooms and costs you things in others. Tonight it was going to cost them something. He did not yet know how much. "I need you to be careful," he said. "One more time. The way you say a thing when you know it won't be heard but cannot stop yourself from saying it. Please, whatever you see tonight, whatever you think needs to be addressed, please let me handle it." Eleanor looked out at the sea lines ahead of them. "You handle the contracts," she said. "I'll handle the room." He did not respond, because there was nothing left to say. The grand ballroom was exactly what it always was at this event. Crystal chandeliers throwing light in every direction. Tables in white linen. 300 conversations happening simultaneously at a frequency that sounded, from the entrance, like a single sustained note of importance. Women in dresses that cost what most American families spent on groceries in a month. Men in suits with the particular leanness of things that had been cut to fit a specific body rather than a general human shape. Underneath all of it, the champagne and the flower arrangements and the protest laughter was the thing nobody said aloud but everyone felt. Power. Who had it? Who was acquiring it? Who was performing it convincingly enough that no one would check? Eleanor Hartwell moved through the entrance at 6:30 in the evening, and the room did what she expected rooms to do. Heads turned. Her name moved from mouth to mouth in a low wave. People she had known for decades began their approach. Sylvia Crane materialized at Eleanor's elbow within 90 seconds. 55, rail-thin, midnight blue and something architecturally complex. Champagne flute already in hand, held with the ease of a woman for whom the glass had become a natural extension of the arm. "You look extraordinary," Sylvia said. "I know," Eleanor said. This was not vanity between them. This was their specific language. 30 years of friendship, or what passed for friendship, what Eleanor understood as friendship, which was a consistent and mutually beneficial proximity to someone who understood the same rooms and spoke the same vocabulary. Eleanor accepted champagne from a passing tray without looking at the server who carried it. She scanned the ballroom with the systematic attention of someone cataloging assets. Tech, military brass at the far sept, tech executives near the silent auction, Pentagon officials at the bar. Faces she knew from Senate hearing coverage and defense industry conferences and the dome walls of hospitals with Hartwell's name on them. Her eyes moved, assessed, moved again, and then stopped. He walked in at 8:47. She noticed him immediately. Not because he disrupted the room, because he didn't. He arrived without entourage or announcement. Navy suit impeccably cut, moving through the crowd with the ease of someone who had not needed to prove his right to enter any room in a very long time. People genuinely greeted him, not the performative warmth of networking, the real kind. 3 Pentagon officials straightened almost imperceptibly when he approached their table. 2 executives whose faces Eleanor recognized from magazine covers extended handshakes held beat longer than courtesy required. He sat down, table 12, the VIP table. Eleanor's champagne glass paused halfway to her mouth. He was a black man in his mid-50s, broad through the shoulders, the posture of someone whose body had been trained to a standard and had then lived at that standard long enough that it became simply how he moved through the world. He was not scanning the room the way climbers scanned it. He was settled present. The conversation was serious in the way of people exchanging actual information rather than performing exchange. One of the Pentagon officials was taking notes. Notes! At a charity gala. Something moved through Eleanor's chest that she did not slow down to examine. It arrived labeled as offense, and she accepted the label. Sylvia, she kept her voice even. The man at table 12, navy suit, do you know him? Sylvia glanced with the practiced subtlety of someone who had spent 3 decades gathering social intelligence in exactly these rooms. No idea. Some diversity initiative, probably. You know how these events are now. Eleanor found Douglas near the bar, deep in conversation with someone from Lockheed. The smile Douglas wore when he was saying pleasant things while thinking terrified ones. Douglas, she materialized at his elbow. The man at table 12, has anyone confirmed his invitation? Douglas looked across the room, back at Eleanor, and his expression did the thing it sums did. The thing that contained, in a single configuration of muscle, an entire argument he had decided not to have. Eleanor, I'm asking a simple question. Not tonight. Very quiet, very direct. We cannot afford any incidents. Please, whatever you are thinking about, don't. I'm not thinking about anything, she said. But she was. She returned to her table, sat, maintained 3 simultaneous conversations with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this since her 20s, said the correct things about the charitable work being honored, laughed at the right moments, and every 90 seconds her eyes crossed the room to table 12. He was engaged, genuinely engaged. The kind of conversation where nobody is performing, where real information is moving between real people who have real authority over real decisions. The silver-haired woman with the colonel's insignia, Patricia Hayes, though Eleanor did not yet know her name, leaned forward when he spoke, made her notes. Eleanor's fork moved from plate to mouth and back while her mind built a structure around what she saw, and the structure looked like the one she always built. The one with certain foundation that she had never once examined because they had always been there, load-bearing, invisible the way things are invisible when you have never had to see them. By the time the main course was cleared, she had made a decision. Sylvia caught the change. The tightening around Eleanor's eyes, the purposefulness arriving in her jaw. Eleanor, quietly, urgently, don't what? Whatever it is, don't. Eleanor set down her taps and napkin, smoothed it first, then pushed back her chair. I'm going to clarify a seating question, she said. She picked up her wine glass, the full one, Cabernet Sauvignon, and she walked across the ballroom. The walk took 45 seconds. Long enough for the people nearest to table 12 to register her trajectory and slow their own conversations. There is a quality to purposeful movement in a crowded room, a kind of pressure that people feel before they consciously see the source. The nearby tables turned first, then the ones beyond, a ripple spreading outward. 5 faces looked up when she arrived. 3 Pentagon officials, 2 tech executives, and the man in the navy suit. He was mid-sentence when she spoke. Excuse me, she projected it. Not loudly. Clearly, the voice of someone who has been heard in important rooms for 30 years and knows exactly how much volume the task requires. The sentence stopped. I'm Eleanor Hartwell. She said it the way you state a geographic fact. Hartwell Defense Group. Partners with the Department of Defense for 75 years. My grandfather supplied the ammunition systems for 3 major operations in Korea. The silver-haired official, Colonel Patricia Hayes, nodded with the careful courtesy of someone practiced in managing difficult conversations without escalating them. Mrs. Hartwell. Good evening. Eleanor's gaze moved to the man in the navy suit and stayed there. I couldn't help noticing, she said, in the pleasant tone she used when being unpleasant require cover, that there may be some confusion about the seating arrangement this evening. The VIP section has been reserved for verified defense contractors and active military leadership, not, she let the pause work, charitable attendees. Somewhere behind her, the ballroom shifted, the sound of 300 people's attention reorienting. Phones lifted. The man in the navy suit did not shift in his chair, did not increase his rate of blinking, did not change the arrangement of his hands on the table. He looked at her with the steady attention of someone receiving information they had anticipated. "I believe my invitation specified table 12, ma'am. Is there a problem with my placement?" His voice was quiet, not soft. The difference matters enormously. Soft suggests the speaker is managing uncertainty. Quiet, delivered from that stillness, suggests the opposite. Eleanor felt something she did not expect. A brief interference, static in a signal that had always been clean. A half-second in which something in her recognized something in him, and the recognition was not comfortable. She overrode it. "May I ask who sponsored your attendance?" Her tone remained pleasant, parental almost. "Because looking at this table, I see genuine military leadership. I see actual defense industry principles." The gesture, again, dismissive, economical. "And then there's you." The Defense Innovation Unit extended the invitation, he said. "The DIU, she absorbed this. And which program? Which company are you representing? I'm here in my capacity as, let me guess." She heard herself and did not stop. "A community outreach position, a diversity program. Something the DIU brought in to improve their representations metrics." She smiled, the smile that did not reach anything. "I understand the purpose of those programs. But the conversations happening at this table are perhaps above the level that, ma'am." The tech executive, she did not know his name, she had not bothered to learn it, shifted forward. "Perhaps we should. I haven't finished." She did not look at him. "I have been watching this all evening. People who have not earned their plates at these tables, sitting with our military leadership, being treated as though they carry equivalent standing to families who have actually given something to this country. It is not fair. To the companies that have done the work, to the men and women who have given their careers to genuine service." She turned back to the man in the navy suit. "I'm here to evaluate potential partners for our next major defense initiative," she said, quietly, steadily. Eleanor laughed. It was not a performance. It arrived genuinely. The sound of someone encountering something she found absurd and responding without filter, which was, in some ways, the most honest thing she had been all evening. But it was loud. It carried. Evacuate. She let the word stand alone in the air. That's remarkable. And what qualifies you to evaluate defense contracting partnerships? What is your background? Which deployments? Hey, now, firmer, a new quality in her voice. "I think it would be advisable. Do you have any idea," Eleanor said, turning the full force of her attention back to the man across the table, "who you are talking to? My family has been serving this country since before people who look like you were permitted in the same buildings as the decision-makers." The silence that followed us was the specific silence of 300 people ceasing to breathe simultaneously. A chair scraped somewhere behind her. Douglas's voice, crossing the room, calling her name in the tone she had heard twice in 31 years. The tone that meant the floor has just shifted and you haven't felt it yet. She picked up the wine glass. Her hand was perfectly steady. The motion was controlled, almost precise. The Cabernet fell in a clean arc and landed on his face. His collar, his navy jacket, ran down his cheek, pooled on the white tablecloth in an expanding stain the color of something irreversible. "Did you really think," Eleanor said, into the complete and absolute silence of the Fairmont Hotel ballroom, "that you belonged here?" She set the empty glass down, a sharp, clean clink against the tablecloth. The man in the navy suit did not move. For 4 seconds, he sat with red wine tracking down his jaw, and Eleanor had not written into the scene she had composed in her head. He smiled, not bitter, not suppressed, not the tightened expression of someone managing a reaction they cannot afford to display. He smiled the way a person smiles when they have asked a question and received a clearer answer than they expected. He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a folded white handkerchief, pressed it to his face, methodical, unhurried. The movement of a man with nowhere else to be and nothing left to prove in this particular room. Security was converging from 2 directions. He raised one hand. They stopped. "That won't be necessary. To the guards." Still that quality of quiet. Mrs. Hartwell was expressing her views on defense contracting qualifications. He continued working the handkerchief along his jaws. "It has been a very informative evening." Douglas reached Eleanor's shoulder. His grip found her arm. "We're leaving, Eleanor, now." She did not move immediately. She was watching the man at the table, waiting for something to crack in him, some evidence of the diminishment she had intended, some sign that the correction had landed the way corrections were supposed to land. He looked like a man concluding an assessment. He looked in a way she felt, but could not name, as though he was done with her. Colonel Hayes was on her phone, quietly, her back partially turned. Sylvia was at the edge of Eleanor's vision with an expression Eleanor had never seen on her face before. An expression that said, "I cannot help you from here. Not from this. Not with this." Eleanor. Douglas pulled. "Come on." She let him move her. Not because she was unsettled. That was what she told herself in the moment, walking across the ballroom with her husband's hand on her arm and 300 pairs of eyes tracking their exit. She let him move her because she was finished. Because she had said what needed to be said, and she was done with that table and that man. As they crossed the floor, phones lifted around them like something phototropic, turning toward the moment, recording it. The ballroom was almost entirely silent now, and the silence had a texture to it, heavy. The specific weight of a room full of powerful people witnessing something they know they will be talking about for years. None of that registered to Eleanor. She walked with her head up and her shoulders back, and the empty wine glass still on the tablecloth behind her like evidence of something she had not yet decided to examine. Douglas drove. He did not speak for 9 minutes. His hands were at 10 and 2, exactly. The controlled grip of someone managing something large through sheer structural precision. Eleanor looked at her reflection in the passenger window. The dark glass showed her back to herself. Same dress, same posture. The city lights moved behind her face as they crossed the bridge. She felt satisfied. She was certain she felt satisfied. I handled that correctly, she said. Douglas said, "It's nothing. Someone needed to say it. The road, the darkness, the engine. Douglas, say something." He said, "Do you know who that was?" She opened her mouth. "Don't answer that." He cut her off, quiet and final. "Because whatever you're about to say, whatever category you have already put him in, I need you to understand that I am going to spend the next several hours trying to find out who he actually is. And I have." He stopped. His jaw moved. "I have a feeling that when I know that, what happened tonight is going to look very different than it looks right now." Eleanor turned back to the window. Her reflection watched her from the dark glass. The city fell away behind them. The suburbs arrived. The specific money at rest. She told herself the thing moving through her was satisfaction. The clean satisfaction of having said a true thing that needed to be said in a room full of people too polished to say it themselves. She was not frightened. She was Eleanor Hartwell of Hartwell Defense Group, third-generation American legacy, and she had addressed a seating irregularity. 3 miles behind them, in the back seat of a black government vehicle on the same highway heading the same direction, General Marcus Webb held a Cabernet-stained handkerchief and looked at the same darkness passing outside the same window. His aide, Captain Joanna Lee, had been with him for 3 years. She had watched him in combat debrief rooms and congressional hearings and budget negotiations that could have collapsed and didn't, because Marcus Webb had a quality she had spent 3 years trying to name and had finally given up naming and simply relied on instead. She said, "Sir, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Captain." She watched him fold the handkerchief, set it on the seat beside him. She had no idea, she said, not a question. No, he looked out the window. She had no ID assessment report updated. Full documentation, time-stamped. Include footage from the 3 attendees who recorded this incident. He was quiet for a moment. "And pull the Hartwell cultural file, the complete one. I want to review the full 42 pages before the morning meeting." "Yes, sir." The vehicle moved through the dark. Lee looked at the folded handkerchief on the seat between them. She had served under this man for 3 years through situations she would not describe at a dinner table. She knew better than to say the next thing. She said it anyway. "For what it's worth, sir, I'm sorry that happened." Marcus Webb looked out at the passing dark. "Don't be." His voice was level, not cold, just settled. The voice of someone who has organized themselves around an interior truth for a long time. "Every person who has ever dismissed me based on what they saw when they looked at me has given me something." He picked up his phone, opened the Hartwell file. "Information," he said, "about who they are." The highway unspooled ahead, and on 3 separate phones still in the Fairmont Hotel ballroom, videos were already uploading. The compression algorithms working through the footage, the platforms receiving it. The feeds beginning to surface it to users who would watch it and share it and watch it again. By morning, Eleanor Hartwell would be famous, not the good kind. And the man she had dismissed would still be sitting at his desk with a 42-page file open and a decision to make that would determine whether 75 years of Hartwell legacy survived the night she had just handed him. She didn't know that yet. She was still in the passenger seat, watching her reflection in the dark glass, telling herself she was satisfied. She would not be sleeping tonight. Neither would Douglas. She woke up famous, not the good kind. Eleanor opened her eyes at 6:14 in the morning and reached for her phone the way she always did, before coffee, before Douglas, before the day had arranged itself into something manageable. The screen was already lit with notifications, stacked the way notifications stack when something has happened while you were sleeping. 47s. She refreshed. 63. She refreshed again, and the number moved so fast it stopped being a number. It became a pressure, something pressing against the glass from outside. She sat up. Douglas's side of the bed was empty. Made, not slept in and made, but never slept in, which meant he had been up since, before she came to bed or had not come to bed at all. She had not noticed. She had slept the particular deep sleep of someone whose nervous system had finally exhausted itself after hours of sustained certainty. She tapped the first notification, a video, 43 seconds, and there she was, in the crimson Valentino, moving across the ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel with a wine glass in her hand and the complete composure of someone performing a scene they have already rehearsed in their head. The camera caught everything, the approach. The words, not all of them audible, but enough. The tilt of the glass, the arc of the wine. The man sitting there receiving it with a stillness that the camera somehow made more devastating than any reaction would have been. Eleanor watched it once, then watched it again. Not because she wanted to, because she could not locate the off switch. The third time through, she turned the sound up and heard herself. And heard what other people heard when they heard her. By the time she set the phone down, the notification count had crossed 200. She remembered the Instagram post at 2:17 in the morning. This also arrived back to her now with the horrible completeness of a dream recalled mid-morning. She had been sitting in the bedroom with the adrenaline of the evening still cycling through her, and Douglas already downstairs, not speaking to her. And she had hit the app and typed with the righteous energy of someone who needed the record to reflect where they stood. Sometimes standing up for what's right means standing alone. Real Americans, those that don't apologize for defending our values and our institutions. The people who built this country deserve their seat at the table. Full stop. Truth matters, no apologies. She opened it now. Read it. Read it again. The comment section had been active for 4 hours. She scrolled for 30 seconds and stopped. The 30 seconds was more than sufficient. The words arriving one after another like thrown objects. Fast, targeted. The specific fury of people who had watched 43 seconds of video and decided they had seen enough to know everything they needed to know. The problem was they were not wrong. Her phone rang. Douglas. "Don't go online," he said. "I'm already online." A silence containing several different kinds of damage. "Where are you?" she asked. "My office." A pause long enough to have furniture in it. "I've been here since 4. The stock, down 19% at pre-market. His voice had the controlled flatness of someone managing something in her force through sheer structural discipline. "I have 11 board members trying to reach me, 3 major subcontractors who want clarification calls, and a number from Pentagon personnel that I have been avoiding because I do not yet know enough to have that conversation intelligently." Eleanor looked at her Instagram post on the screen. "I'll release a statement," she said, "a clarification, explaining the context." Eleanor, some septo shifted in his voice, a new quality. She stopped. "I need you to hear me. Last night, the man at table 12. I had my assistant run a background check starting at midnight, 3 hours. The best private investigation firm in California." She waited. They found almost nothing. He let that land. No LinkedIn. No social media presence of any kind. Public records that stops at the surface and then go blank. Which is not normal. Which is, my assistant said it. People with classified security clearances sometimes have scrubbed digital footprints. The thing that had been sitting in Eleanor's chest since the car ride home shifted its weight. "He was a West Point graduate," Douglas continued. "That much is in public records. Combat service, multiple tours, durations that I had to look up because I did not recognize them. Eleanor, I have been in defense contracting for 30 years and I did not recognize his decorations." "Douglas, his name," Douglas said, and stopped. Started again. "His name is General Marcus Webb." The word sat in the space between them. "General. 4-star general of the United States Army," Douglas said. "Director of the Defense Innovation Unit. The person who personally approves or rejects every major technology contract the Pentagon awards." He stopped again. "Every major contract, including the UAV contract. Including the one, $2 billion that was supposed to save this company." The weight in Eleanor's chest became something else. Something with more gravity than weight. Something that sat lower and did not move when she breathed. "The UAV contract is his to award." Douglas's voice had gone very quiet. Or was. I don't yet know which tense is accurate. I am about to find out, which is why I am sitting in my 6:30 in the morning instead of speaking to you in person. A pause. Eleanor, I need you to not do anything else. No statements, no interviews, no social media, nothing until I call you. Can you do that? Yes, she said. She meant it when she said it. She called a podcast host at 9:15. She had not gone home to change. She told herself this was a practical decision. The studio was 20 minutes from the house, and the interview was at 11, and there was not time. Which was true enough that she accepted it without examining whether it was the whole truth or simply the part of the truth that made the decision feel reasonable. So she arrived at Marcus Sullivan's studio in the crimson Valentino she had worn to the gala the night before and sat down across from him in a chair that was a slice of the for desk and accepted the microphone the producer clipped to her neckline and looked into the camera on the tripod in the corner. Marcus Sullivan was 50, professionally sympathetic, and had 2 million subscribers built on a particular skill. The skill of making people feel that the thing they had already decided was correct was in fact correct. He was good as it. Eleanor had been on his show twice before. He liked her. She liked him. Walk me through last night, he said, and she did. The gala, the seating arrangement that appeared wrong. Her family's 75 years of genuine, documented service to American defense. The specific frustration of watching standards erode in rooms that had been built by people who understood what standards meant. The man at the table who seemed out of place, her decision to address it directly. And you poured wine on him, Sullivan said. I made a statement, Eleanor said. Some people are calling us assault. Some people call everything assault. Sullivan nodded with the energy of someone who had been waiting for precisely that line. No regrets? He said. And Eleanor Hartwell, sitting in a podcasting studio at 11 in the morning in a dress she had slept in and not slept in and worn to the worst decision of her life, said the words that would spend the next 18 months following her everywhere she went. None whatsoever. I would do it again tomorrow. The camera captured it at a clean angle. Good light, her chin up, her postured exactly what it always was. The producer uploaded the clip at 11:43. By noon, it had been acquired by CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, the Associated Press, and a YouTube channel with 4 million subscribers that posted it under the title, Defense Billionaire's Wife Has Zero Regrets Attacking Black 4-Star General at Charity Gala. 4-star. The word was in the headline. Eleanor did not see the headline until she was sitting in her car outside the studio watching the sidewalk fill with camera her phones. Douglas, she answered. Where are you? He said. She told him. The silence that followed had a texture she had not heard from him before, not anger. Not the controlled flatness of the morning. Something that sounded like a man watching something fall and being too far away to do anything except watch. Turn on CNN, he said. She opened the browser on her phone, and the first thing that loaded was her own face. From the studio, from 40 minutes ago, the red dress, the steady hands, the chin at its angle of absolute certainty. And beneath her face, in white text on a dark band, wife of defense contractor CEO doubles down on racial incident at Charity Gala. I'm at the Pentagon, Douglas said, very quietly. I'm walking in now, Eleanor. I need you to understand what I am walking into. Douglas, the man you called a quota hire. He stopped. The man you told didn't belong at that table. The man you poured wine on in front of 400 witnesses and then went on a podcast this morning and told the world you had no regrets about. His voice broke on the last word. Just slightly. Just enough for her to hear that something real was under the discipline. He controls what the UAV contract is worth. Every major contract Hartwell has ever held or might ever hold passes through his desk. And you did that to him. And then you said you would do it again. Eleanor was very still. I have to go in, Douglas said. Do not do anything else. Eleanor, please, not one more thing. The line went dead. She sat in the car. Outside, 2 cameras had organized themselves on the sidewalk. A third was arriving. The producer from Sullivan's studio appeared at the studio door with an expression that communicated efficiently and without words that her continued presence was creating a logistical problem. Eleanor started the car. She drove home. She sat in the kitchen of the large, quiet house and made tea and did not drink it and watched it go cold. Douglas told her about it the following morning. Not that evening. That evening, he came through the door at 9:15 and went directly to the kitchen and poured 2 fingers of bourbon and sat at the counter without speaking. Eleanor sat across from him. For once in her life, she did not fill the silence. She did not know what to fill it with. And she recognized dimly, at the edge of a perception she was not ready to fully enter, that this was unusual, that the absence of a prepared response was itself information about where she was. He sat there for 22 minutes. Then he went to bed. The next morning, coffee, not bourbon, both of them gray, with the specific grayness of people who did not sleep for reasons that will not resolve with sleep. He talked. She listened. The conference room was cold. He said that first. The particular institutional cold of a government building that is optimized for function and treats human comfort as a secondary consideration. General Marcus Webb sat at the head of the table, not in a ruined suit, not with wine residue on him, in a perfectly pressed dress uniform, stars on the shoulders, decorations on his chest that Douglas now recognized because he had spent part of the previous night looking them up, and the looking up had been its own education. The Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, 2 bronze stars with valor devices. The uniform of a man for whom 25 years of service had not been a career choice, but something closer to a vocation. He had looked at Douglas and said, "Please sit down, Mr. Hartwell. We have a significant amount to discuss." The other people in the room introduced themselves. Colonel Patricia Hayes from Pentagon Personnel, the silver-haired woman from the gala who had been watching Eleanor's approach with the expression of someone witnessing thinks an accident they cannot prevent. Secretary Liaison Amanda Reeves. 2 officials from the Defense Innovation Unit whose titles Douglas relayed to Eleanor in the flat voice of someone reading from a document. General Webb placed a bound document on the table. 42 pages. He did not explain what it was. He slid it across to Douglas and waited. Douglas opened it and the executive summary. The document had been in preparation for 6 weeks. Not 6 days, 6 weeks. Compiled by a team that had been quietly assessing Hartwell Defense Group's workplace culture, internal complaint history, HR practices, and leadership conduct prior to the gala, prior to the wine, prior to the videos and the headlines and in the podcast clip. 6 weeks. He had come to that gala already knowing. The summary described 15 years of internal complaints, discrimination allegations, hostile environment reports, profund pattern anomalies that had been routed to HR and then managed into disappearance. 3 formal lawsuits. 2 settled with non-disclosure agreements. 1 that reached discovery before settling, leaving a paper trail that described a workplace where certain employees were systematically assigned lower visibility, evaluated by shifting metrics, passed over in ways that individually could be explained and collectively could not. Eleanor's name appeared 4 times, twice connected to specific documented incidents, once in the testimony of a former employee in the 2019 settlement. Once in an HR note that had been buried in a subfolder with a name that did not suggest its contents. Douglas had sat with that document on the table in front of him and understood something he had been carefully not understanding for a long time. He had not created the culture the document described. He had inherited it from Arthur, who had inherited it from the man before him. A culture that had calcified over decades into something so ambient, so structural, so woven into the way the company simply operated that it had become invisible to the people inside its side. The way wallpaper becomes invisible when you have lived in a room long enough. He had signed the 2019 settlement without reading the complaint. His attorney had summarized it. He had signed where indicated. He had not asked follow-up questions because asking follow-up questions would have required acknowledging that there was something to follow up on. He had chosen not to look. Choosing not to look, General Webb said from the head of the table, is still choosing. The UAV contract, Douglas had finally asked. Webb had looked at him with the steady, measuring attention of someone delivering a verdict they have already examined from every angle. Was awarded to the competing bid this morning, he said. The decision was finalized at 9 a.m. And then, because he was the kind of man who did not perform cruelty even when cruelty might have been understandable, the contract decision was not made because of the incident at the gala. The gala confirmed a pattern of evidence that had been assembled over 6 weeks of assessment. The gala was not the cause, it was the conclusion. Douglas had set cold room for a long time after that. Webb had said one more thing before he left. There is a path forward for Hartwell Defense Group. One path. It requires genuine structural transformation, not a press release, not a sensitivity seminar, not the appearance of change. Genuine change. New leadership in key positions. External oversight with real authority. A public accounting that demonstrates actual understanding of what has been wrong and why. He had paused at the door, and it requires removing your from any affiliation with the company. Any. The transformation cannot be credible if the most visible expression of your company's culture retains a connection to it. He had left. Douglas sat at the kitchen counter the next morning and was describing it. Eleanor looked at her coffee. He came to the gala knowing, she'd said. The entire evening was an assessment. Yes, she turned this over. The fact of it. The architecture of the thing. That while she had been crossing the ballroom with her wine glass and her certainty, she had been not correcting a situation but completing a test. That every word she had said, and every silence she had maintained, and every dismissal she had delivered to every server and every woman she had looked through in that ballroom had been observed and documented by a man who already had 42 pages of context for what he was seeing. "The board," she said. Douglas looked at her. "My father called the board meeting yesterday afternoon," Douglas said, "while you were at the studio." Senator Arthur Caldwell arrived slowly. He was 82 years old and moved with the deliberate care of a man who had learned that deliberateness was its own authority. He did not need to arrive quickly. Rooms waited for Arthur Caldwell. Rooms had been waiting for Arthur Caldwell for 6 decades, since he was a young man with a defense industry inheritance and the will to expand it into something his grandfather had not imagined. He sat at the head of the table. He looked at his daughter. Eleanor had prepared. She had spent the 2 days since the Pentagon meeting preparing the way she prepared for everything, constructing a structure, ordering her arguments, identifying the strongest version of her position. She was ready to explain the context, the legitimate frustration underneath the action, the provocation she had faced, the 60-day financial countdown that Douglas had put in her chest like a splinter on the drive to the gala. She had a version of herself that was comprehensible, if not defensible. Her father looked at her and she understood, in the first 3 seconds of that look, that the version she had prepared was not the version this room required. "Eleanor," Arthur said, "explain to me what you were thinking." She tried. She talked about the gala, the seating arrangement, the principle of merit, the long history of what their family had built, the frustration of watching people occupy rooms they had not earned entrance to by any standard she recognized as legitimate. The board listened. Rain Ford, former Deputy Secretary of Defense, who had served on the Hartwell board for 9 years and raised his voice approximately twice in that time, opened folder on the table. "I served under General Webb," Ford said, quietly, "with the economy of someone who does not waste words because they have learned that words have weight. Kandahar Province, 2009. He was a captain then. We were pinned down in a burning vehicle and he went back 3 times. He looked at Eleanor 3 times under direct fire. To pull men out, he closed the folder. That is who you called a quota hire in front of 400 people on camera. The room was very still. Arthur Caldwell picked up a pen, looked at it, set it down, looked at his hands. What he said next was not what Eleanor expected. She had expected defense or disappointment or the specific brand of patrician disappointment that comes with a lecture about family responsibility. She had not expected what actually came. "I need to say something," Arthur said, "to this board and to my daughter." He did not look up from his hands. The culture described in General Webb's assessment report, the complaints that were processed and buried, the settlements that were paid in silence, the pattern across 15 years. He stopped, breathed. "I built that, not with intention, not believing it was what I was doing, but I built it by looking consistently in the other direction for 40 years. By telling myself that looking away was morally neutral, that if I didn't direct it, I wasn't responsible for it. The boardroom was so quiet the ventilation system was audible. My daughter did not invent herself," Arthur said. "She learned from the environment I maintained, the values I made up by omission, the things I permitted by not examining them." He finally looked up. His eyes moved to Eleanor. "That does not excuse what you did. It does not make you less responsible for your own choices, but it means this room cannot hold you accountable without holding me accountable first. And I am doing that now, publicly. To this board, on the record." He picked up the pen again. Eleanor was looking at her father and seeing something she had not seen in 58 years. Her father uncertain. Her father arrived at the end of something he had built and confronting what it actually was. Raymond Ford spoke. "We've received contact from the EEOC. A formal inquiry into Hartwell's workplace culture is being opened. And the existing contracts," said another board member. "3 major clients have requested review calls. Lockheed is exploring alternative supply chain options for 2 shared programs," said a third. "Boeing's procurement team has postponed next negotiations indefinitely." Each piece of information arrived with the flat precision of a structure being systematically disassembled, not dramatically, just accurately. Arthur Caldwell set down his pen for the final time. "By the authority vested in me as chairman of this board," he said, "I am moving to remove Eleanor Hartwell from all positions, advisory roles, and formal affiliations connected to a Hartwell Defense Group, effective immediately. Her dividends and trust fund distributions are frozen pending legal review of the company's liability exposure arising from this incident and the matters detailed in the assessment report. Eleanor said, "Daddy, the motion is on the table," Arthur said. "Board members will vote." They voted. It was not close. Eleanor sat at the table after the vote and looked at the faces she had known since she was a child, family friends, business partners. People who had attended her wedding and her parents' anniversary dinners and the charity galas that bore her family's name. They looked at her with the expression people wear when they have done something necessary and are not finding it satisfying. Arthur did not speak to her again in the boardroom. He gathered his papers slowly, stood slowly, moved toward the door with the careful deliberateness he had arrived with. At the door he paused, awed, did not turn around. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," he said, "for what I gave you that I should not have given you, and for what I failed to give you that you needed." He left. Eleanor sat in the boardroom alone for 7 minutes after everyone else had filed out. The ventilation system, the empty chairs, the folder Raymond Ford had brought and left on the table. She did not open it. She already knew what was in it was in. The divorce papers arrived on a Friday. A woman from Douglas's attorney's office came to the house at 2 in the afternoon. Professional, measured. Said something sympathetic in the practiced way of someone whose job requires them to deliver difficult things to people in difficult circumstances and who has learned to do it without adding to the difficulty unnecessarily. Eleanor stood in the entryway and accepted the envelope. The woman left. The house was very quiet. Rosa had not come on Tuesday, had not called. Eleanor had understood without needing to call and confirm that Rosa would not be coming again. Someone had made a decision, or Rosa had made it, and the result was the same. The kitchen was slightly less organized than it had been. The garden outside the window was beginning to show the first signs of the neglect that gardens show when the person who loves them stops arriving. Eleanor set the envelope on the hall table, walked to the kitchen, put the kettle on, stood at the counter and looked at the garden. In the 3 weeks since the gala, her life had been reorganized around its own destruction with the efficiency of something that had been structurally compromised long before the visible collapse. The Instagram post, the podcast, the board meeting, the EEOC inquiry. It was a stream of news cycles that kept her face on screens she had not chosen. The attorneys, the statement she was not permitted to make, the calls she made anyway to people who had occupied her phone's contact list for decades. Sylvia had called on Wednesday of the second week. Eleanor had been waiting for the call and dreading it simultaneously, which was itself information. You do not dread calls from friends. You dread calls from people whose continued presence in your life has always been contingent on conditions you are only now understanding. Sylvia's had said, "I care about you, Eleanor, genuinely, but I cannot be publicly associated with this right now. You understand. I hope you understand." Eleanor had said that she understood. She had not understood, not then, but she was beginning to. She thought about the other names in her phone. The women from the boards and the galas and a third year was just circulating through rooms together. The men Douglas had called friends and whose calls he was not returning. The social architecture she had inhabited her entire adult life, believing it was built on genuine connection, discovering now that it was built on mutual utility and proximity and the shared benefit of being seen in the same rooms. Not friendship. Proximity mistaken for friendship. The kettle boiled. She made the tea. She stood at the counter while the tea went cold and looked at the garden. Rosa would not tend any more and did something she had not done as long as she could honestly remember. Nothing. No composing, no structuring, no preparing the next version of events that would position her better. No calls, no plans, no management of what came next. Just standing at the kitchen counter while the tea went cold. And in the standing, in the nothing, something arrived that she could not have named accurately, but that felt like the first honest moment in a very long time. Not peace, not resolution, not anything that had a clean shape. Just the specific and unfamiliar sensation of a person who has run out of performances and is standing in silence of a house that has gone quiet for good reasons. She was afraid, not of what she had lost. Not of the money or the status or the company or even the marriage, which she was beginning to understand had been something other than what she had believed it was. She was afraid of something smaller and more fundamental. She was afraid that she had been living for 58 years as a person she had never examined. That the woman she had been performing, the certainty, the authority, the absolute confidence in her own high hierarchy of human worth, had not been her actual self, but a structure she had inherited and occupied and reinforced until the structure and the self had become indistinguishable. And now the structure was dismantled, and she did not know what was underneath. She picked up the envelope from the hall table, opened it, read the first page, set it down, called Douglas. He did not answer. She called 3 more times over the course of the evening. He did not answer any of them. She did not leave messages because there was nothing she knew how to say that was not another version of a performance, and she had run out of performances. She went to bed in the large house at 10 o'clock and lay in the dark and thought about a man sitting across a table from her with red wine running down his face and smiling. Not bitterly, not triumphantly. The smile of someone who had asked a question and received a complete answer. She thought about what question he had been asking. She thought about what her answer had been. And for the first time since the night of the Fairmont Hotel Gala, through the Instagram post and the podcast and the board vote and the EEOC inquiry and the divorce papers on the hall table, Eleanor Hartwell lay in the dark and did not try to construct an alternative version of what had happened. She let it be what it was, which was the smallest possible beginning, but it was the first real thing she had done in 3 weeks. Outside the bedroom window, the garden was dark. The lights of other houses moved at the edges. Somewhere in Oakland, a shelter was preparing for the morning, filing cabinets full of people who needed to be seen. An apron on a hook the color of something that had been washed so many times it had forgotten what it started as. She did not know about any of that yet. She would. 3 weeks from now, a woman from the court would sit across from her in a government office and explain the terms of 200 hours of community service, and Eleanor Hartwell would sit plastic chair and nod, and not yet understand that those 200 hours were not the punishment. They were the education, the only one that was going to matter. She stood outside for 4 minutes before going in, not because she was afraid. That was what she told herself. She was not afraid of a building in Oakland. She had faced Pentagon officials and Senate subcommittee hearings and board votes conducted by people who had known her since childhood and still raised their hands against her. She was not afraid of a door, except she was standing on the sidewalk at 6:52 in the morning, not going through it. The building was unremarkable. 2 stories. A painted mural on the east wall, hands of different colors overlapping, which Eleanor registered and did not comment on, even internally, because she was aware that her internal comments were not always trustworthy. A small parking lot with 3 cars already in it at this hour. A notice board by the entrance with flyers for English classes, and a food pantry schedule, and a job fair happening the following Saturday. She had worn dark slacks, a plain white blouse she had found at the back of her closet. Something purchased years ago for a reason she had already forgotten. No label she would have recognized in her previous life. Nothing that announced itself. Just fabric. Just covering. She had stood in front of the bathroom mirror that morning and looked at herself for a long time. The Valentino was in the back of the closet. She had not moved it and had not thrown it away and had not been able to decide what either action would mean. The manicure had grown out completely. 3 seconds since she had been to a salon. Her nails were shorter than she had kept them in 20 years. Less prepared. Less the nails of someone who expected to be observed. The door opened before she reached it. A man held it from inside. Tall, broad through the shoulders, as in the way of someone whose body had been shaped by physical demands and had kept the record of them long after the demands changed. Late 60s, gray at the temples. Moving with a slight accommodation in his left leg, the kind of adjustment that is not a limp exactly, but a negotiation. Old damage lived around rather than recovered from. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You the new volunteer?" he said. "Yes, you're 8 minutes early." He stepped back to hold the door wider. "I like that." His name was Henry. She learned it in this next 90 seconds when he extended a hand and said it plainly. The way people say their names when names are simply names, not currency. Not introduction to a resume, just the word that belongs to them. "Eleanor," she said. He considered it, nodded once, as though it had passed some quiet internal criterion she was not privy to. "Come on," I said. "I'll show you where the aprons are." The apron was green, faded to something between sage and gray. The kind of thing that had been washed so many times it had moved past color into a category of its own. Eleanor tied it around her waist at 6:58 in the morning and stood at the serving counter and waited for 7:30. Breakfast service began with 211 people. Eleanor moved through the motions with the careful precision of someone determined to perform a task correctly, understanding it. Ladle, bowl, next. Ladle, bowl, next. The mechanics were not difficult. She was capable. She had always been capable. Capability had never been the question. She did not talk. Neither did most of the people moving through the line, which was not what she had expected. She had expected She examined this honestly, standing at the counter with the ladle. She had expected something more legible as suffering, more curated. The way suffering was presented at the charity gala she had attended for 30 years. Digestible. Kept at a distance sufficient to allow the people writing the checks to feel something without being changed by it. This was just people. Getting breakfast. Some tired. Some talking to each other. Two men near the window were laughing about something. Genuinely laughing, the kind that takes up space. A woman in a wool coat that had seen many winters moved through the line with the efficiency of someone who had done this before and had other things to do afterward. A child, a girl, say maybe 6, looked up at Eleanor from the line with the direct, unfiltered gaze that children deploy before they learn that looking at strangers is complicated. "I like your hair," the girl said. Eleanor said, "Thank you." The girl moved on, and Eleanor stood with the ladle in her hand and felt something arrive that she could not immediately classify. Small, not unpleasant, the feeling of being seen by someone who had no agenda in the seeing. She filed it away and kept working. She was going to be bad at this for a while. She knew that by the end of the first week. The mechanics she mastered quickly. By the second week, the staff had learned she was reliable with the administrative work, the job placement files, the benefits was free-for-all paperwork, the documentation that had to be precisely correct, or people lost access to things they could not afford to lose. She was fast and accurate and did not complain and did not require direction once she had been shown a system. But the being there part, the actual presence part, that she was bad at. She moved through the shelter the way she had moved through rooms her entire life. As though the room were a backdrop and she were the subject, she completed her hours and left. She did not linger. She did not initiate. She responded when spoken to with the pleasant efficiencies of someone who has confused courtesy with connection. Henry watched this for 6 weeks without commenting. She learned things about him during those weeks in the incidental way you learn things about people you work alongside. He had served 22 years in the Army, 2 tours in Afghanistan, and time in other places he did not name at the coffee counter. He had a daughter in Sacramento and a granddaughter he showed photographs of without being asked. He laughed easily. Not the performed laughter of social occasions, but the real kind that arrives without planning and takes up more space than the moment seems to warrant. He treated everyone in the shelter, every person who came through the door, regardless of what they were carrying, regardless of how long they had been coming, regardless of whether today was a good day or one of the other kinds, with the same quality of attention. Not pity, not the careful warmth of some managing a professional interaction, just attention. The simple act of actually looking at the person in front of you. Eleanor observed this. She did not yet know what to do with the observation. On a Thursday in the 7th week, Henry appeared beside her at the filing cabinet she was reorganizing and stood there for a moment without speaking. Eleanor did not look up. "You know what your problem is?" he said. "I'm certain you'll tell me. You're waiting for it to be over." She stopped. "Every morning you come in like you're serving a sentence," Henry said. "Not unkind, just accurate. The voice of someone who has learned to say true things without adding unnecessary weight to them. And every afternoon you leave like someone told you made parole. And that's one way to do 200 hours. Plenty of people do it that way." He paused. "But the clock moves real slow when the only thing you're watching is the clock." Eleanor looked at him. He was looking at the filing cabinet, not at her, offering her the space to receive what he was saying without requiring her to perform a response in real time. "And what's the other way?" she said. He smiled, slight, the preliminary version of the full one. "Show up tomorrow," he said, "and find out." He walked away. She stood at the filing cabinet for a moment, then went back to work. The next morning, she arrived at 6:48, 12 minutes early instead of 8. She did not analyze why. She made the coffee. She had started a fresh press 2 weeks in because the industrial coffee was genuinely terrible, and improving it seemed like a contribution she could make without requiring anyone to thank her for it. And she waited for Henry, and she handed him a cup when he came in, and neither of them mentioned the conversation at the filing cabinet. But something had shifted. Not dramatically. Not in the way of movie transformations, where a scene change announces a new person. In the way of actual things changing, which is slow and inconsistent and frequently invisible until you look back from a distance and notice the accumulation. She started remembering names. Not the way she had memorized names at galas, strategically, as tools as the currency of social navigation. In the way you remember names when the person attached to them has become real to you, because you have heard them laugh, or watched them on a hard day, or learned something about them that you did not set out to learn, and that arrived anyway. She started staying past her scheduled hours, not dramatically. 20 minutes, half an hour. Long enough to finish a thing properly rather than leaving it at a stopping point because her time was technically complete. The clock stopped moving the way Henry had described. Gerald Washington came in on a Tuesday in December. He was 54. He sat at the corner table with his coffee and did not move for 2 hours. Not sleeping, not using his phone. Just sitting with the particular stillness of someone who has been carrying something heavy for long enough that moving has started to seem like more for effort than it's worth. Eleanor noticed him on her way past, kept walking, came back, stood at the end of his table. "Can I sit down?" she said. He looked at her. "You don't have to." "I know, Sinna," she said, and sat down. She brought her own coffee. She did not bring a clipboard or a referral form or any of the intake paperwork she was qualified to administer. She just sat down across from a man at a corner table and held her cup. After a while, Gerald spoke. Not to her exactly. More to the space between them, to the air of the room, which is sometimes easier than speaking to a specific person. 19 years at a manufacturing plant in Fresno. The same work, the same department, the same colleagues, people whose children's names he knew, whose habits he could have described in detail. And then the envelope. The whole department, all on the same day, all in the same conference room, all handed the same envelope. Restructuring, optimization. The words that mean the same thing and say nothing. His wife, Maria, had held things together for 2 years afterward, while Gerald, he stopped, looked at his coffee. While I held the opposite of things together. Eleanor did not say anything. Did not offer perspective or resources or the efficient redirection toward solutions that was her instinct. She sat and held her cup and listened to the rest of it. The apartment they had to give up. Maria going back to work at 51. The particular shame of a man who had defined himself by his work for 19 years and then lost the work and did not know what remained. When he finished, Eleanor said, "Do you want to go back to manufacturing?" He looked at her. The question had surprised him. "What?" The plant closed, not the industry. "Do you want to go back to that kind of work?" He thought about it. Actually thought. She watched the think as happen on his face. "Yeah," he said slowly, it says. "Yeah, I do. I was good at it." "Then let me show you something in the files tomorrow," she said. "There's a Fresno placement program I've been putting people into. It takes about 2 weeks to process. I can walk you through it." Gerald looked at her for a moment. "All right," he said. She found him a position in 11 days. Not through the remnants of her former network, not through calling in favors, through the actual system, the real process, the one that existed imperfectly and slowly and bureaucratically but was real. Gerald shook her hand when the call came through. Eleanor nodded. Later in the kitchen, Henry appeared beside her and handed her a cup of coffee. He said nothing, which was how Henry expressed most things he considered important. She stood beside him. "He's going to be okay," she said. "Most of them are," Henry said. "So eventually, if somebody sees them," she turned that over. "If somebody sees them, Henry." She looked at her coffee. "Can I ask you something?" "You've been working up to it for 3 months," he said. "Might as well." She almost smiled. "You knew who I was from the beginning." "Saw the video," he said. "Same as everyone else." She waited. "I thought about it," he said, not looking at her, looking out the window at the parking lot where Gerald's car was pulling up. "For a while, whether I wanted you here, whether it made sense to have a woman like you in a place like this, whether you'd do more harm than good just by being present." He paused. "And then I thought about all the men and women I served with who had to prove themselves every single day to people who had already decided the answer has." He turned to look at her, direct, calm. The look of someone who has organized themselves around an interior truth for long enough that sharing it no longer costs them anything. And I thought, maybe the point isn't to keep the wrong people out. Maybe the point is to see what happens when the wrong people are put somewhere they can't perform, somewhere they have to be actual. Eleanor said nothing. "Jury's still out," he said, and went back to the kitchen. She stood at the window after he left. The parking lot was empty now where Gerald's car had been. She thought about what Henry had just said with the specific attention she was learning to give to things that arrived with dying invited. The jury's still out. Not a condemnation, not absolution, something more honest than either. An acknowledgement that the work of becoming a different person than you have been is not announced. It is accumulated, quietly, in corner tables and filing cabinets and cups of coffee that you stop and bring to someone who is sitting alone. She went back to the files. She had 3 more people to see before noon. Douglas called on a Wednesday in February. Eleanor was in the supply room reorganizing donation bins when her phone vibrated. She almost did not answer. They had settled into an arrangement of attorneys and structured communication, and the occasional necessary exchange about practical matters conducted with the careful distance of people who had known each other too long to be strangers and heard each other too much to be easy, she answered. The Oversights Committee submitted their first quarterly report, he said, and we passed the initial review, a pause. Something complex in it, not triumph, not relief exactly, something quieter. The sound of a man who has been doing very hard work and has received the first indication that the work is having the intended effect. Raymond Ford he's been exceptional. The new HR leadership is different, Eleanor. The company feels different. She thought about Gerald, about 211 people on a Monday morning, about the apron on its hook. Good, she said, a silence. The board is looking at a small contract, Douglas said. Technology assessment work for a DoD subprogram. Nothing near the scale of the UAV deal, but something. A beginning. Good, she said again. Another silence. Longer. The kind that has a question in it that neither person is sure should be asked. How are you? Douglas said. She thought about it. The actual question, the actual answer. I'm learning something, she said. I don't know what to call it yet, but I'm learning it. He didn't ask what. Maybe he understood. Maybe he was learning something of his own in the restructured offices of Hartwell Defense, and the external oversight meetings, and the daily work of choosing to look at things directly. Take care of yourself, Eleanor, he said. You too, Douglas. She went back to the supply room. She thought about her father. Arthur Caldwell had called once since the board meeting, a brief call. He had asked how she was. She had said she was managing. He had said he was glad. There had been a silence, and then he had said, I think about what I should have done differently every day. I don't say that to ask for anything. I just want you to know I'm doing it. She had said, I know, Dad, which was the first genuinely simple thing she had said to him in a very long time. He was 82 years old. The company he had built was being rebuilt without him. The culture he had maintained by looking away was being systematically dismantled by people he had hired. He was doing his accounting, privately, in the way of someone who cannot undo what is done and has chosen to spend what remains honest examination rather than self-protection. She realized, doing the same thing in an Oakland shelter. At a filing cabinet, at a corner table with a cup of coffee. The same work, different rooms. Patricia came in on a Thursday in March. 47, accounting background. 12 years at a mid-sized firm until the firm restructured. A quiet woman who answered direct questions directly and then went silent, as though she had a set quantity of words per interaction and used them carefully. Eleanor sat down with her file. Your resume is strong, Eleanor says. I've been told that, Patricia said. Then why haven't you applied to the positions on your shortlist? Patricia looked at the table. I'm not sure I'm ready. For what specifically? Silence. For the interview, Patricia said finally. Eleanor looked at her. You were managing 3-person and team positions. You were presenting quarterly reports to a board of directors. You are ready for the interview. You've been ready. She paused. What you're not ready for is being told no, which is different. Patricia looked up. Being told no doesn't mean you were wrong to try, Eleanor said. It means you need another approach, or a different position, or more information about what they were actually looking for. She slid the shortlist across the table. Pick one. We'll prepare for it together. If it doesn't work, we'll look at why and try the next one. Patricia looked at the list for a long moment, then picked up a pen and circled the third position. That one, she said. Good, Eleanor said. Let's start with the questions they'll definitely ask. She got the job 5 weeks later, called the shelter to tell Eleanor before she called her mother. Eleanor was at the filing cabinet when Henry found her that afternoon. Patricia called, he said. I know, you don't look as surprised as you should. I'm not surprised, Eleanor said. She was read 3 months ago. She needed someone to tell her. She filed a folder. We waste a lot of time not telling people what we can clearly see. Henry was quiet for a moment. Look at that, he said. She looked at him. Nothing, he said. I'm just looking at you. She understood what he meant. And because she was becoming gradually and imperfectly a person who could receive things without immediately converting them into something manageable, she let herself receive it. Don't get sentimental, she said. Henry laughed, the full version, the one that took up all the space it wanted. She went back to the files. Spring arrived without asking. The shelter's garden, a small one behind the building, tended by whoever had time, began doing what gardens do when someone remembers to water them. Eleanor found herself spending 20 minutes there on Tuesday mornings before the building officially opened. Not gardening exactly, just being there, watching the specific patience of growing things. She had not placed roses. She had started tending her own garden in Palo Alto. Badly at first, then less badly. The learning curve of someone who had always had the product of other people's labor without understanding the labor itself. It was slower than she expected, more forgiving than she expected. Things grew despite her errors. Things failed despite her efforts. The garden did not operate on a system of merit she could decode. She was beginning to find this comforting rather than frustrating, which was new. In Smay, Sylvia called again. Not the call of the cessant weak, not the carefully managed distance of someone protecting their social position. A different call, shorter, less rehearsed. "I've been thinking about what I said," Sylvia said. "Don't," Eleanor said. "Eleanor, you were honest," Eleanor said, "about what the friendship was. I would rather have that than a version of it that pretends tense otherwise." She paused. "If there's something real underneath, it'll still be there when things have settled. If there isn't, we've both saved ourselves some time." Sylvia was quiet. "That's a very different answer than I expected," she said. "I'm a very different person than I was in November," Eleanor said. "Some days more than others." They talked for 12 minutes. Not about the gala, not about the fallout. About Sylvia's mother, who was sick. About a book Sylvia had read that she thought Eleanor might find interesting. About small things, which are the building materials of real conversations. Eleanor did not know yet whether there was something real underneath, but she was willing to find out, which was itself a change. The summer came and went. 200 hours arrived and passed without Eleanor noticing the exact moment they completed. She had stopped counting somewhere around month 5. She was there on Mondays and Thursdays and every other Saturday and some Tuesdays when the caseload was high, because the work was not finished when her legally requirement ended, and because she had discovered somewhere in the accumulation of corner tables and filing cabinets and cups of coffee that she did not want it to be. She was not a good person yet. She would not have said that. Henry would not have said it. The world would certainly have said it. She was a process of understanding what good might mean from the inside rather than as a performance for rooms that were watching, which was different, smaller and truer and considerably harder. But it was real. The Veterans Memorial Ceremony happened on a Saturday. A small park near the Oakland waterfront. Not a major event. No political presence, no cameras beyond a few phones held by family members. Folding chairs on damp grass, a podium. A color guard from the local National Guard unit. The kind of gathering that happens in neighborhood parks across American cities on quiet mornings. Attended by people who are there because they mean it, because the names being read belong to someone they knew or someone they have chosen to remember. Henry had mentioned it the week before. Not an invitation. Information shared between people who had developed the habit of sharing information. "There's a ceremony Saturday at Maritime Park if you want to come." Then walked away before she could answer. Classic Henry. Eleanor came. She sat in the third row on the left side with coffee from the cart near the park entrance. The ceremony, was simple. Names were read aloud. A bugle played. People stood and sat in the shared rhythm of acknowledgement, the specific choreograph of public remembrance, which is not about performances, but about the accumulated weight of all the individual private griefs in the room finding a structure to exist in together. Eleanor watched. She thought about her grandfather, who had started a company because he believed in something. About her father, who had expanded it and looked away from things he should have looked at. About Douglas, who had inherited both the company and the looking away and had now chosen at 62 to do the harder thing. About the men and women whose labor and sacrifice has been for 75 years the nominal justification for the Hartwell family's position in the world, invoked at galas and in congressional testimony and in the family mythology passed down through generations, but rarely examined up close. Rarely understood as individual lives rather than collective legacy. She was looking at the water when she heard footsteps on the grass behind her. Someone sat down, she turned. And there he was, not in uniform, dark jacket, no insignia, no decoration. He looked in civilian clothes on a Saturday morning in a small park like a man who had earned the right to rest and was choosing to spend some of it here. Unhurried, present, the same quality of settled attention she had registered that night in the Fairmont Ballroom and had interpreted, catastrophically, as something that required correction. General Marcus Webb. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them moved, and Eleanor Hartwell, who had spent 58 years knowing exactly what to say in every room she entered, had nothing. Not a prepared statement. Not the carefully worded courthouse apology her attorney had drafted, and she had delivered 6 months ago in the flat voice of someone reading text they did not write. Not a defense. Not an explanation. Not even the most basic social machinery of two people who know each other and must decide how to acknowledge that in a public space. Nothing. Just as her hands in her lap, the water in the and the bugle's last note dissolving into the March air. General Webb looked at the ceremony, at the color guard standing at ease near the podium, at the folding chairs half full of people who had come because they meant it. After a long time, he said, "I didn't know you volunteered here." 14 months, she said. He nodded. "Henry," he said. Yes, something moved in his expression. Brief. Warm. Good man. We served together. We've stayed in touch over the years. He recommended this shelter to me when I was looking for a place the unit could support. 5 years ago now. Eleanor sat with that, of course. Of course, Henry knew Marcus Webb. Of course, the man who had held the door open for her on her first Monday morning, without fanfare, without requiring her to deserve it, with a grace she had not earned and he had not been required to extend, was connected to the man she had poured wine on 14 months ago. The world was smaller and more braided than she had ever allowed herself to see, because seeing it would have required acknowledging that the people she had moved through as backdrop were people with their own histories and connections and the specific gravity of lives fully lived. "Did you know I was here?" she asked. "I knew you had been assigned to community service in Oakland." "That's not what I asked." A pause. Henry mentioned your name, he said, "and you came anyway." "I was coming for the ceremony." He looked at it, level. "If Henry mentioned your name to me, and mentioned the ceremony to you." Then Henry made a decision about what might be useful. He paused. "He does that." Eleanor thought about Henry at the filing cabinet 7 weeks into her sentence. The clock moves real slow when the only thing you're watching is the clock. Henry in the kitchen, handing her a coffee and saying nothing. Henry watching her across the shelter for 14 months, with the patience of someone who had decided to sit to see what's happened. Henry, who had quietly arranged this moment with the casual precision of someone who understood that certain conversations had to happen somewhere specific. Not in a courtroom, not in a boardroom, in a small park, on damp grass, with a bugle note fading into the air above names being read aloud. "I owe you something. This isn't an apology," Eleanor said. Webb said nothing, waited. "The apology at the courthouse was a legal requirement," she said. "I know that. You know that." It was the correct legal language, arranged in the correct order by someone who does this professionally. It said the right things. She looked at her hands. "What I want to say, Nisses, now is different, and I'm not going to say it well because I have a prepared version of it." She stopped, started again. "The things I said that night, the things I believed that I didn't know I believed until they came out of my mouth in front of 400 people. She was speaking carefully, not performing carefulness, actually being careful, with the specific attention of someone handling something that can be damaged by carelessness. "I have been trying for 14 months to understand where they came from, and the honest answer is that they didn't arrive that night. They were already there. They had always been there. Say, I just never had to see them because no one had ever made me look." Webb still said nothing. "My father said something at the board meeting," she continued. "He said I didn't invent myself, that I learned from what he maintained. And I have been sitting with that for over a year, and I think it's true, and I also think it doesn't excuse anything. Both of those things are true at the same time." She looked up. "I was a person who had been built carefully and thoroughly to not see certain things. And I want to be very precise about this. Not seeing them was not an accident. It was a choice I made every day without acknowledging it as a choice. Because acknowledging it would have required changing. The ceremony was ending. The color guard was at attention for the final moment. General Webb watched it. Then he said, "Can I tell you something, please?" The night of the gala, in the car afterward, he was looking at the ceremony, at the flags. "My aide asked me if I was all right. I said yes, because I was, because I've been versions of that situations on more times than I have counted, in conference rooms, on bases, in restaurants, in the offices of people who controlled things I needed and who looked at me and decided in the first 3 seconds what I wasn't. He paused. "You were not the first person to look at me and see something managed," Eleanor said nothing. "But here is what I want you to understand," he said. "Every time that has happened, every single time, it has cost the person something. Not because I engineered consequences. Not because I planned anything. But because the world is organized in such a way that dismissing the wrong person is always expensive, and the expense arrives whether or not you ever understand what you paid it for." He looked at her. "That is not justice. It is not the moral systems. It is simply what tends to happen." "The policy changes," Eleanor said. "The character assessment backs to protocols were in development before the gala, but what happened accelerated them. Yes." He was straightforward about it. and gave them a public face that made them harder to quietly shelve. Which was not something I planned or could have planned. He paused. Sometimes the thing that creates change is the things that was meant to prevent it. She thought about that, about her father's admission in the boardroom, about the 42-page report that had existed for 6 weeks before she poured a glass of wine, about the way the whole structure of what had happened was larger and older than one night in a hotel ballroom, a long time in the making, waiting for the moment that would make it visible. "I need to ask you something," she said. He waited. "Does it matter?" She said it plainly, not rhetorically, as an actual question. "What I'm doing now, the shelter, the files, the people I'm sitting with at corner tables." She was not looking at him now, looking at the folding chairs being stacked by a volunteer in a yellow jacket. "Not for my reputation, not for what anyone thinks. For something in here," she pressed her hand flat against her sternum, "that has been wrong for a very long time. Is there a version of this where what I do now matters?" General Marcus Webb was quiet, long enough that she thought the question might not have a public answer. That it might be the kind of thing that could only be resolved privately over time, in ways that could not be confirmed by the person you were asking. Then he said, "Ask Henry." He was already standing, Mrs. Hartwell. He looked at her one final time, not with warmth exactly, not with coldness, with the specific, clear regard of someone who sees you as you actually are, without the overlay of what they need or want you to be, which is rarer and more valuable than warmth. "Don't waste what this has cost you." He walked toward the folding chairs. He stopped once to speak to a man in a veteran's cap who had been standing near the podium. They shook hands. The man said something that made Webb nod, something private and small and real. Selenor sat on the damp grass with her coffee gone cold and watched. She did not try to interpret the conversation she could not hear. Did not construct a narrative around it. Did not do the thing she had spent 58 years doing, which was to take the information available to her and arrange it into a structure that confirmed what she already believed. She just watched. Two people who knew each other from something real, talking in the morning light of a small park in Oakland, and she let that be what it was. She asked Henry the following Tuesday at the filing cabinet, where the real conversations happened between them. Not at the counter, not in the kitchen, but the filing cabinet sideways with room to receive. "Does it matter?" she said. "What we do here, what I do here." Henry did not look up from the folder he was reviewing. "You know what I noticed about you?" he said. "In 14th month? What? First month, every conversation you had, you asked within 3 minutes what they did for work. He filed something. Set the folder in the correct position. Like the job was the answer to who they were. Like if you knew the job, you knew the person. He filed another thing. You don't do that anymore." Eleanor thought about it. He was right. She had not noticed the stopping, just the not doing. The habit had dissolved at some point she could not locate, and she had not registered its absence. "That matters," Henry said. "To the next person who sits across from you." He turned to look at her. Direct, settled. The look of a man who has nothing to prove and nothing to manage and is simply telling you something's true. "The files are just paper. The apron is just fabric. The work is who you decide to see when you're sitting across from someone who has nothing to offer you." He paused. "You've been learning that." Slowly. "But you've been learning it." He went back to his folder. "It matters," he said, simply, finally, and that was the whole answer. Eleanor stood at the filing cabinet for a moment after he moved away. The shelters was filling up around her, the sounds of morning coffee, the front door opening and closing, voices she recognized now, names she knew without effort. People who had become real to her in the way that people become real when you have actually looked at them. She went back to work. Outside, in the small garden behind the building, something was coming up through the March soil. Tentative, green, patient in the way that growing things are patient, not waiting for permission, not requiring acknowledgement, simply arriving in their own time, because that is what growing things do. A letter came 6 weeks later, to the shelter, her name on the envelope. Hartwell Defense Group's return address had been how she received things for 30 years. This envelope had different letterhead, the seal of the Defense Innovation Unit. She stood in the supply room and opened it. 3 paragraphs. The first described the character assessment protocols now formally adopted across 17 federal agencies. The second described Hartwell Defense Group's successful completion of its external oversight review and pending qualification for a DoD Technologies Assessment contract, the first in 16 months. The third paragraph had 4 sentences. The work of accountability is rarely visible while it is happening. It becomes visible in retrospect, when the choices made in ordinary moments accumulate into something that can be seen. I have been told that your mornings are spent differently now than they were 14 months ago. That is not a small thing. No signature. Eleanor read it twice, folded it, put it in the pocket of the faded green apron. She went back to the counter where the morning line was forming. 211 people on a Tuesday in April. Patricia was in the line, not to receive a meal, but to volunteer, the first time she had come back since getting the job. Gerald had called the week before to say he had been promoted to shift supervisor. Henry was in the kitchen, doing what Henry always did, which was everything that needed doing without requiring anyone to notice. Eleanor picked up the ladle. The first person in the line was a woman she had not seen before. New, carrying something in the careful way of people who are in a new place and do not yet know the rules. Eleanor looked at her, not through her, at her. "Good morning," Eleanor said. "I'm Eleanor. What's your name?" The woman looked up, slightly surprised, the way people are surprised when they expect to be processed and are seen instead. "Denise," she said, "Denise." Eleanor handed her a bowl. "Welcome. If you need anything after breakfast, I'll be to the table in the corner." Denise nodded, moved on. Eleanor handed a bowl to the next person. The line moved. The morning moved. And Eleanor Hartwell, at 59 years old, in a faded green apron in a shelter in Oakland, 1 year and 4 months past the worst night of her life, was doing the only work that had ever mattered. Not because someone was watching, not because it would restore what she had lost, because the person from her was real, and she could finally see them. Which was not the end of anything. It was just the beginning of the next thing. And for the first time in 59 years, that was enough.